In Florida, in 1951, the sun blazed high at its zenith. Its scorching breath felt even beneath the shade of ancient, sprawling oaks. The town of Mims, where time seemed to slow its pace, was known primarily for its endless orange groves and the quiet, measured life that reigned there. However, beneath this outward facade of serenity smoldered embers of deep social tension, permeating the American heartland, especially in the southern states where racial segregation was not merely a set of laws, but a way of life. In this world where everyone had their place, Harry and Harriet Moore dared to challenge the established order. They were not just a married couple. They embodied the driving force of the civil rights struggle, tireless activists whose words ignited hope in hearts and whose actions inspired change. Harriet, with her sharp intellect and unwavering faith in the triumph of justice, became a co-founder of the Florida Council for Equal Rights. Harry, her devoted ally, shared her passion for the cause and her genuine selflessness. They organized meetings, registered Black voters, and relentlessly penned petitions, openly defying a system that had oppressed their people for centuries. Their activities did not go unnoticed. In an atmosphere of mounting paranoia and fear, where any sign of defiance could be perceived as a direct threat to the existing order, their work drew the keen attention of those desperately striving to preserve the old, brutal system. The night of November 25th, 1951, was frosty, but even the biting air couldn't extinguish the burning fire of their devotion to their shared cause. Harry and Harriet, as if sensing the trials to come, plunged into pre-holiday preparations, diligently packing Christmas gifts for the children and families they supported. Their modest dwelling, where faith in a brighter future flickered, served as a true hub for their tireless activism. On that fateful evening, they were returning home after an intense meeting with a delegation from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAOCP. Their lives, woven with threads of struggle and radiant hope, were suddenly torn apart. No sooner had Harry reached for the light switch than a deafening explosion shattered the silence. A powerful homemade bomb, cleverly concealed beneath the front threshold, annihilated their home with terrifying force and extinguished their lives. The blast was so colossal that its roar echoed for many miles. Concerned neighbors, rushing towards the sound, were met only by the sight of smoldering ruins and debris scattered everywhere. Amidst this chaos, Harry, despite his horrific injuries, desperately tried to escape from under the deadly weight of their ruined home. But his body, ravaged by the blast wave, was almost unrecognizable. Harriet, who had been closest to the epicenter of the terrifying explosion, sustained injuries incompatible with life. In the oppressive silence that followed the deafening roar, it became clear. What had happened was no random act of violence. This was a brutal, meticulously planned attack, aimed at destroying key figures of the civil rights movement. It was a declared war by those who were terrified of change, those who genuinely believed their power and undeniable privileges were built on a foundation of racial superiority. An investigation was immediately initiated, which, as unfortunately often happened in those difficult times, immediately encountered colossal difficulties. The police, consisting predominantly of officers of white race, often displayed a chilling indifference and, at times, outright hostility towards the Black population. The path to justice for African Americans was a matter that demanded not only incredible courage, but also iron perseverance. Eyewitnesses, many of whom were deeply frightened, fearing imminent retribution, were extremely reluctant to make contact, hiding in the shadows of pervasive fear. An atmosphere of universal fear and deep distrust literally hung in the air, stifling movement and thought. Still, despite all the unimaginable obstacles, the detectives, along with the tireless NAACP activists, embarked on their own independent investigation. They knew the Ku Klux Klan, an organization whose name had long become synonymous with terror and cruelty, was behind this brutal act. Harry and Harriet Moore were known for their relentless work registering black voters, and it was precisely this fact, without a doubt, that served as the fatal trigger for the Klan. The registration of African Americans, the granting of their right to vote, meant the inevitable loss of power for the white elite, and its representatives were prepared to go to any monstrous extreme to preserve their age-old dominance. The first days after the bombing were shrouded in impenetrable sorrow and deep shock. The world mourned the tragic loss of Harry and Harriet Moore, who had selflessly fought for a better future. However, their deaths proved not to be the end of their noble cause, but rather a powerful catalyst for the entire civil rights movement. Their sacrifice was not in vain. The names Moore became a true symbol of courage and self-sacrifice. The investigation, meanwhile, moved forward agonizingly slowly. Numerous interrogations were conducted, and scattered evidence was meticulously gathered, yet establishing a direct link between the crime and specific Ku Klux Klan members proved an incredibly challenging endeavor. This organization, much like a shadow, operated in utter darkness, relying on brutal intimidation and the faceless anonymity of its members. Despite these difficulties, the investigation still uncovered clues that unmistakably pointed to the Klan's involvement in this monstrous act. Eyewitnesses recalled suspicious vehicles flickering in the dark and unfamiliar individuals, like phantoms, observing the Moore residence days before the fateful explosion. However, piecing together these fragmented details to irrefutably prove guilt was a true test. Harriet Moore, despite her mortal wounds, lived for several more agonizing days in the hospital. In her final, faltering words, she expressed a desperate hope that her tragic death would serve as a powerful impetus for an even more determined and uncompromising fight for justice. Harry, slowly recovering from his own injuries, resolved to continue their shared mission, but his heart was forever broken by grief. Over time, through the relentless persistence of courageous activists, fearless journalists, and a few honest, incorruptible law enforcement officers, some information was managed to be drawn from oblivion. Ultimately, several Klan members were identified who were strongly suspected of orchestrating this cowardly bombing. Nevertheless, despite all the irrefutable evidence gathered, the path to obtaining confessions and subsequent prosecution proved to be arduous and fraught with obstacles. In those distant years, the justice system, alas, was often permeated by deeply entrenched racism, and proving the guilt of the Klan members, those bearers of evil, became an exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, task. The Moore family case never received its full and final resolution in a legal sense. Not a single perpetrator was convicted for this monstrous, unimaginable atrocity. It left an indelible, deep scar on the soul of the entire community and on the entire complex history of the long and persistent struggle for civil rights. However, despite everything, the sacrifice of these innocent souls was not forgotten. Their names, now forever etched in golden letters in the annals of history, became symbols of unbroken resilience and unyielding will in the face of all-consuming injustice. The atmosphere in the town of Mims, consumed by grief and confusion after the brutal bombing, changed beyond recognition. Fear, intended to shackle and paralyze, for many, conversely, became a powerful catalyst, a source of new, unwavering resolve. People who had previously bowed their heads and remained silent now found their voice and began to speak, openly and boldly. Solidarity within the community grew, becoming as one, united in the face of shared misfortune. Widely covered by the media, the Moore family's case captured the nation's attention, mercilessly exposing the brutal reality of racial violence that had previously been carefully hidden behind the facade of a prosperous Southern idyll. We, people of today, view those events through the lens of past decades. But let us not forget that in 1951, this was not merely the past, but a vivid, pulsating, bloody confrontation. Imagine that all-encompassing fear when you feel a persistent, unkind gaze upon you, when your very pursuit of equal opportunity is perceived as a brazen crime. Imagine the depth of despair when, seeking support, you encounter only cold indifference, or even worse, condemnation. The psychological depth of this story extends far beyond the tragedy of one specific family. It encompasses countless unseen victims, those who were an integral part of this difficult struggle. These are the stories of people who risked everything, their safety, their future, simply to gain the right to vote, the opportunity to learn in decent schools, to live without constant, debilitating fear. These are the stories of fathers and mothers who, with bitter pain, tried to explain to their children why the world was so unjust, and how they themselves, these small, fragile beings, should fight for their place in the sun. Despite the fact that official verdicts in the Harry and Harriet Moore case were never rendered, its impact proved colossal. It starkly highlighted the urgent need for fundamental reforms within the justice system itself, demonstrating the vital importance of support from an active civil society, and of course, the role of independent mass media in reporting and fighting for justice. This case was but one of many that ultimately led to such significant changes in legislation and public consciousness. Yet, even after so much time has passed, a bitter taste remains when we recall it. The unsolved crime, committed with such unthinkable cruelty, sharply reminds us how deeply ingrained prejudice and unvarnished hatred are within society. And this inevitably forces us to consider, how many more such grim stories remain untold? How many unsolved crimes continue to smolder in the depths of history, patiently awaiting their moment to finally be heard? And will we truly ever be able to definitively rid ourselves of this heavy burden of the past if we do